The first things come to mind is 3-touch. That is a system that is supposed to work very smoothly, but it is a system that has many different pieces or cogs to that particular machine, if you will. If one of those break down, then that means the other areas are left out just kind of hanging. So the fact of the matter is that how well are they functioning? And what if I was to assign somebody and their job was to go into every ministry and not say much of anything, not do much of anything, but simply assess the functionality of the ministry? Do they have a mission statement? Are they adhering to their mission statement? What is their actual levels of leadership? Do they have a president, if you will? Is there a ministry leader? Is there a secretary? How is their role? Are they actually doing? Do they understand what a secretary is? Do they understand really what a treasurer does? How does that function in relation to what their requests are that may need to supply or be funded by the supply of the overall church? How does that work into the overall ministry? What if I had somebody to come in and simply assess? Not say anything, not do anything, but just assess. And you would know that they were there to assess. What will we find in our function? Particularly when we were assessing the ministry itself, and they gave me a report and came back and said, well, you know what, listen, this is what it seems to me. It seems like some of the leaders really are not communicating very well. You've got 2 that are doing well, and you've got 2 that are not doing well. Or the 2 that aren't doing well really don't seem to communicate well with everybody else, so they're off to the side doing what they want to do while all the other people are trying to focus on what they're trying to do. Then when they come together, really things are still haphazard, because at the end of the day, nobody is still communicating, so everything is just still. Are you following what I'm saying? I mean, I can keep talking, but the fact of the matter is that there's a problem with function. This should be one of the most simplest parts, functioning. Why? Because all that means is people are set in the right place, they have clarity and understanding what their roles are, and they simply perform what they need to perform. That really should be it. Of course, we're going to run into some challenges every now and again, because function is function. Every now and again, we have to get our oil changed in our car, don't we? Are you hearing what I'm saying? Every now and again, you got to put some air in your tire. Doesn't mean you got to get rid of the tire. Doesn't mean you got to throw out the engine. Doesn't mean you got to buy a brand new car just because you need to get your transmission tuned up, does it? We have to maintenance the functionality of the vehicle. As I was saying earlier, Christ has made the church to be the vehicle through which the kingdom has been or is still being presented. But every now and again, the car needs an overhaul. You see what I mean? So we need to recognize, where are we missing our function? Somebody is out of order. Something is not well. Somebody doesn't understand. Because if they were, then we would be functioning. Is somebody marching to their own drum beat? Is somebody trying to add on a structure within a structure? Is somebody trying to do something that is self-aggrandizing? Why are we not functioning? And it ought to be real easy. Why? Because it's a simple measure of deduction. If everybody understands what their roles are, if everybody's clear about their functionality, if everybody's operating in their place, if it's very well stated what the overall outcome of the ministry is, it ought to be real easy to check off points and say, you know what, listen, I understand this, this is good, this is good, this is good. If all this is good, then this is the only thing that's sticking out right there. We got to deal with this. And because of this is affecting what our bottom line is, if you want to use corporate terms. And that's how we have to be. And some of us, when I was talking to, kind of, I don't want to say aggressive, but very, very straightforward, if you will, stringent, if you will, some meetings ago. The fact is that really what we want to see, and there is also too, in that same book by Robert Shanice, he talks about, honestly, well, actually, no, not that book. There's another book by Sue Kibbe that is called Ultimately Responsible. And in that book, what she says is that there are 4 levels. And on the inside of the level, on this inside right here, this should be investment. In other words, when we come, and I honestly cannot remember all of them. I know this one is the prospector. I believe this is the engaged. Oh, no, this is the active. No, that is the engaged. And the other one is the active participant. It may sound the same, but it's a little different. And all of this leads to where we have an investment. And basically what that's saying is this, is that whatever was poured into an individual from the time that they were prospecting various aspects, if not the ministry themselves, to the time where they became engaged. Y'all, so you understand what I'm saying. Engaged to the active. From this point to this point to this point, they get deeper and deeper and deeper connected to the ministry. So by the time they get to the investment, that's when all of what has been poured out in this one, and this one, now it's time to bring back or to expect a return. Do you see what I'm saying? So the more that we start talking about function and more we start really looking at how things are supposed to work, and as leaders, we're supposed to have this keen eyesight. We're supposed to be developing this. We're supposed to making sure that everything is supposed to be functioning. And so from functioning, it ought to flow. Because if everybody's in the right place, everybody understands what their positions are, understand what their duties are, everybody is moving, then guess what happens? You ought to be able to turn the car on, and the car ought to do what? Drive. If everything is working, if you turn the key on and the car comes on, you understand what I'm saying? And the car is in idling position, then that means the only thing you need to do is switch it in gear and start the flow. If everybody is settled, seated, established wherever they need to be, and it's already functioning, there's no issues, or if there are, they've been handled and settled, then anything left is we ought to have a flow. What does that mean? That means we ought to see the ministry active. We ought to see the ministry moving. They may not necessarily get everything on the P's and Q's and all that, but the ministry ought to be moving. We ought to see the ushers bustling. We ought to see the youth ministry without problem. We ought to see them at the youth Bible study. We ought to see them at the children's church, King's Kids, youth church. We ought to see them all over the place. Matter of fact, we should be flowing so well. I'm going to get to flourishing in just a second, but it should be flowing so well that it really ought to be smooth. We ought to work past all of our difficulties. We ought not have too many challenges at that point. And then what begins to happen is once people see us active, the women active, the men active, the ministry active, guess what happens? You'll have more people that will want to be involved, and the ministry starts flourishing. That means it just doesn't stay the same 15 people that's been coming the last 2 months. That means somewhere in that active flow of ministry, that also invitation should be a part of that. Because if we're invested in it, if we spend our time with it, if we wrestle with it, if we're praying for it, if we're flowing and functioning in it, then we're going to appreciate it. And guess what's going to happen? We're going to want somebody to become a part of it. Or not only will we want somebody to be a part of it, but to be honest with you, other people will see how well it's functioning and flowing, and they will want to be a part of it before you even ask them. Do you see what I'm saying? So we've got to make sure that our ministry, this is the 3 F's. We got to make sure that it's done. Function, flow, and flourish. Hands down, we need to make sure that those things are moving in that level. All right? And lastly, because I know, what time is it? 1:20? Okay. Lastly, I'm just going to say this, and then we'll close out today. If there's any more questions or comments or things like that, we can take them after this last thing. For our leaders, there's also not only 3 F's, but there are 3 A's. Three A's. The first is for every leader. 3 A's of leadership, if you will. There should be 1, aptitude. The next one is anointing. And then the last one is accountability. Oops. Accountability. For every leader, there needs to have some type of aptitude. If you're going to be a confident leader, then you need to have some aptitude. Do you have the wherewithal to function in your capacity? Is there a challenge for you to function in your role? Whether it's one of time, whether it's one of talent, whether it's one of treasure, whether it's one, honestly, simply of willingness, whether it's a level of us wanting to do certain things, being shaped, placed in a structure that is different from what you're used to, or in addition to that, do you have a particular anointing for that area? Maybe that's not the right area for you. Remember, we're trying to move from simple appointment unto anointment. And then lastly, when you are finally in your place, are you accountable? In other words, are you able to account for your level of stewardship and leadership? Can we account? In other words, can I sit down with you and ask you a very direct question? Is your ministry functioning? And if it's not, why isn't it? And what are you doing about it? That's able to account. You can say, well, 3Touch, for example. You say, listen, Pastor, we called 14 people on between Monday and Wednesday, and this is what we found out. Or the youth, we're going to have a meeting about the Christmas cantata. I'm just throwing stuff out. We're going to have a meeting about the Christmas cantata on Tuesday next week, and then we're going to get back with you with just the basics of what we would like to do and give you our vision and all of that. Are we able to account for certain things? Because if we can't account for it, then sometimes that could be a problem in planning. So that may mean that we may need to assess that ministry area a little differently. Does that make sense? When we, at the end of the day, converting strategy into synergy, all of this said begins to give synergy. Synergy, S-Y-N, is a measure of together. Synergy, sin in front of energy means that together we come together and we have energy. Between our thoughts, between how we see things, between the ministry expectation, everything should come together to where we have some sense of energy together. Not one sticking